right, welcome to another live edition of Blacklisted Radio. It's good to be with you. My name is Doug Owen, and it's the 18th day of October 2015. My website is blacklistednews.com. We aggregate news on a daily basis for you. We curate the headlines that are not necessarily the top 5 or 10 topics the mainstream media, the government, and people in charge would like you to talk about. So we'll do this thing as we do each and every Sunday evening at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. The website is blacklistedраdio.com. You can find the crew, the ambassadors hanging out there. There is a ton of things to get to. Pretty nice week. Not a lot of things that usually garner or demand attention, like school shootings and, war. Those things have been put on the back burner when it comes to the mainstream media. Nobody's talking about what's happening in Yemen. I guess the big takeaway from the week is that the Russians are destabilizing Syria, and they are doing a really, really good job at making the U.S., exposing really the U.S. for what they are, and that is people fighting a proxy war, trying to ouster Assad, and using the boogeyman, the veil of ISIS, to continue to legitimize the reasoning behind occupying the Middle East. I mean, it's pretty simple when it comes right down to it, because the Russians have been basically on a bombing spree, sorties all over the place, and ISIS is pretty much disemboweled. They are shaving off their beards. They are running away, according to RT and other Russian media reports. And it really does expose the U.S. agenda, or really the European, the hegemony, the New World Order's agenda for the Middle East, when you see, a country, a superpower, being able to eradicate, or almost eradicate, definitely decimate the abilities of ISIS in just a few days. Now, I know there's a lot of fans of Vladimir Putin out there, and they like the fact that he is giving a thumb and putting it into the eye of the New World Order. He is probably the X factor in this global push towards a one world system. So people kind of heroify Vladimir Putin in a lot of aspects, and I understand why. Because he seems like, the antithesis to much of the plague of the world, that is U.S. foreign policy. And so I'm not a huge fan of Vladimir Putin himself, but I do like the fact that he has been able to expose the U.S. on many levels, and he holds them to a higher account. So by doing this, it has exposed that complete lack of empathy for victims of bombing campaigns and all of the cannon fodder for the U.S. military. By that, I mean he has exposed that when the Russians kill civilians, it's a huge deal. People are so upset about it. Oh, my God. Their bombs are actually killing civilians. And just the hypocrisy, and just to hear these pundits, smack their lips and talk about how evil it is to these bombing campaigns and what they're doing to all of these civilians it's just outrageous. So anyway, that has been pretty much the focal point, I think, for a lot of analysts, and for those that are watching the war or watching what is unfolding into maybe a World War III scenario playing out in Syria. Of course, the people there are helping the Russians. They want to get rid of ISIS. I don't think that they're huge Bashar al-Assad fans, and of course that is exactly what the U.S. wants to do, is ouster their semi-legitimate, semi-elected leader, formerly dictator, now quote-unquote, I'm using air quotes here, elected leader. But nonetheless, people basically want to live in a world where there is some future, or people believe there is a future and there's reasonable security. That's why the machine rocks on here in the United States of America. People believe that, their pensions are going to pay out, that they'll be able to retire, and their children may at least enjoy some of the same luxuries that we have today. Now, if you live in Illinois, maybe not. What a mess. Talk about a socialist utopia turned into a socialist nightmare. And that is the pension system and all of the other symptoms, the broke government in so many ways, morally, fiscally, destroyed government that you have in Illinois, where you have a lottery. People are paying it to legally gamble with the government, which is never a good idea, by the way. And they're not getting paid. The payouts, they're getting IOUs. The payouts are not there. Now, a few different pension systems in Illinois, state-run, state-funded pension systems are billing up, and people are looking for answers. They're looking for their money. And the question is, who has it? Obviously, they're paying more in debt services and all of those things that attribute to, and let's be honest, I mean, an unrealistic expectation of what you can get in the stock market. All of that combined, you end up with a pretty sad scenario. All right, so I just want to mention that since we're talking about failed policies. I saw this. This is completely out of the view of most Americans that are not on the internet, not reading internet news. I did hear a blurb on the PBS NewsHour about this, but it was put out in the Friday cycle, and basically Friday is a good day to news dump. It's a great way to put out a story, put out information that will not get the scrutiny from the mainstream media that it often deserves. So part of the Friday news dump was a smoking gun email that revealed what they call the deal in blood George Bush and Tony Blair made as they secretly plotted the Iraq war behind closed doors a year prior to the invasion in Iraq. So, we've heard all of the reasons, and now the New York Times and other CIA contributed outlets are running this revisionist history of what happened in Iraq in the lead up to the war, and how George W. Bush did think, and there may have been, probably were, some weapons of mass destruction as a way to try to legitimize the horrendous, crushing decision by the U.S. to invade Iraq. So anyway, this came out. New light was shed on the Bush-Blair relationship by material disclosed by Hillary Clinton at the order of U.S. courts. Once again, Hillary and all of her documents causing some trouble for the elite. This came out on the 17th, just yesterday, from the Daily Mail. So consider the source. It's all over the place, though, but that's where I'm reading it from. A bombshell White House memo has revealed that for the first time, details of the deal in blood forged between George Bush and Tony Blair over the Iraq War. The damning memo from Secretary of State Colin Powell to the President George Bush was written on March 28th, 2002, a week before Bush's famous summit with Blair at his Crawford Ranch. The Powell document, headed Secret Memorandum for the President, lifts the lid on how Blair and Bush secretly plotted the war behind closed doors at Crawford. In it, Powell tells Bush that Blair will be with us on military action. Powell assures the president that, quote, the UK will follow our lead. And they did. The pup. That's why they call Tony Blair the lapdog of George W. Bush. Anyway, it goes on. I mean, this is stone cold proof of war crimes by the U.S. government and Tony Blair. And it's still, I think, so relevant and so important that we understand what has thrust us into probably the worst 12 years, at least decade on, of U.S. policy that you could imagine. I mean, I haven't been able to find too many other examples in our short history here in the United States where a few decisions, a few war crimes have contributed to the loss of life to the tune of millions of people, trillions of dollars. I mean, you can't think of too many examples of worse things that could have happened to the U.S. government and to the people. I mean, quite frankly, it has bankrupted this country. You look at the money that we have spent in Afghanistan and Iraq. If you look at the results of that and how it has completely destroyed these countries, and it is the probably largest contributing factor to the immigration crisis that is happening in Europe today. And that was only the capstone. I mean, we look at what happened in Libya, what's ongoing in Syria, what's ongoing in the Ukraine, what's ongoing in Yemen. It is absolutely atrocious. I mean, just last week we found out, quite candidly, by David Cameron, that the reason that he voted to bring the Saudi government into the UN Human Rights Council was completely political. And he said that the reason he did this, knowing that, of course, this group has nothing to do with human rights. And I mean, just if you buy that, you have to be pretty gullible. But that he did this because they share information about terrorists, which, is pretty laughable. I mean, even if you look at the somewhat watered down version of the finances that led to the attacks of 9/11, I mean, it goes right back to the Sauds. The 28pages.org website, the whistleblowers, people like even Rand Paul that have called for an inquiry into the financial funding of terrorists in this country that led to the 9/11 attacks. I mean, I'm not saying that that's exactly what happened. We don't, actually, I don't know what's in the 28 pages, but I can guess pretty confidently that it pins, just from what people have said, obviously, about after reading it without disclosing classified information, that it pins the Saudis for financing the terrorists that led to the attacks of 9/11. I mean, that right on its face is pretty freaking damning. Nonetheless, I don't think that there will be justice unless war crimes are thrust at George Bush and Tony Blair. I don't think it's out of the question that it could happen. I believe that there is a possibility, if there's any justice in the courts, and if there's any interest in bringing criminals to justice anywhere, in the Department of Justice, where the big J probably lacks the most, that is justice. If there's any conscionable people that actually care about human life and about the future of this country, the only way to right the wrongs of the past are to hold those who have committed crimes. I mean, not just the crimes against humanity that were conducted in the name of the U.S. in Iraq, but the crimes against the American people, the lies that led to a self-fulfilling war, a self-fulfilling prophecy for George Bush, following the footsteps of his father, and the big payday for the military-industrial complex. I mean, let's not forget about all of the benefactors. So anyway, if there's any justice in this world, you would think that with all of these damning, rock solid pieces of evidence that these war crimes were committed, that somebody, one good lawyer would go after the Bush regime. I'm not holding my breath, though. I mean, we just saw this happen. We talked about the Kuntz attack in Afghanistan against the hospital with the Doctors Without Borders. This was as much as Obama apologizes for his war crimes. He seems to have a good tactic with crying with the victims. He's they call him the consoler in charge. He's the lead consoler for the nation. He apologizes for all of the horrible things that happen, at least ones that make the U.S. look bad. And anyway, the target was the hospital. Now, you can talk about this story to high heaven, but if you don't follow it up with the latest, U.S. tank enters MSF hospital in Afghanistan's Kuns, destroys evidence, reports. This came out of the New York Times. On Wednesday, an international panel announced it would pursue an investigation into the United States bombing of Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, or Doctors Without Borders, at the hospital in Kuns, Afghanistan. The U.S. bombing in Kuns killed 22 people and is being called a war crime. Yeah, not just by me, as described by MSF. International President Joanne Liu said, quote, "Our patients burned in the beds. Doctors, nurses, and other staff were killed as they worked. Our colleagues had to operate on each other." Boo-hoo. So sad. Don't feel bad. Obama will cry for you. So anyway, they were going to launch an investigation. And of course, I mean, there's just no couth. There's absolutely no demeanor when it comes to the U.S. and how they take on these issues. And they just went in there and rammed a tank through the door. The International Humanitarian Fact-Finding Committee is the international panel pursuing the investigation. According to its website, aims to ensure the respect for and faithful implementation of international humanitarian law. I'm choking on this. I can't believe that they actually buy this. But anyway, the IHFFC, it's one of these organizations that, you know, it looks legitimate. I'm sure many of the people that head it do want legitimate answers. Unfortunately, they are probably barking up the wrong tree. Anyway, it goes on. The situation, of course, places the United States and, of course, Afghan allies in quite a quagmire because the Afghan allies, whoever they may be this week, a little green on blue crime. It's pretty normal over there. I mean, it's hard to tell who's an enemy and who's a friend, but they obviously the enemies of our friends' enemies were the ones that were the targets here at the hospital. And the U.S. blew it to pieces. And want to look into this, find out exactly what happened, and bring you horrific, detailed reports of how people died in their beds. And, you know, I mean, we look at, you know, just a little flashback back to Colin Powell and the boys convincing the American people and the Western world that we had to intervene in Iraq. You know, the Kuwaiti diplomat's daughter, you should remember her talking about how the Saddam soldiers were throwing children out of incubators. The babies were laying everywhere, I paraphrase from her. And she faux cried for the world. Well, it was years later that it came out that was completely staged, complete fabrication, a manipulation of people, and those things didn't actually happen. So now, fast forward, it's now 2015, and you have these reports where you have things that are even more horrific being conducted by the U.S. government. Of course, they don't want you to hear about all of those horrid details for obvious reasons. All right, quick break. We'll be back with more. You can be part of it. It's Blacklisted Radio.
And I say, hey, leave it like we're renegades. Hey, leave it like we're renegades.
All right, welcome back. It's Blacklisted Radio. It's good to be with you. I don't know where I want to go. U.S.-backed Pinochet dictatorship had high-level ties to child-torturing ex-Nazis and a fortified cult. it's pretty interesting, the exodus of Nazis to South America and some of the places they popped up. We'll save that. We'll put it on the back burner. You can be part of the show. 800-313-9443 is the number. You can go to blacklistednews.com and find all of these stories. Anyway, it shouldn't be a big shock to most of you, but if you haven't seen this 14-minute video, it's well worth watching. It's a new declassified little government PSA on how to carry out biological terrorism against your enemies with chemical weapon agents. Now, of course, you talk about the weapons of mass destruction and how evil Saddam Hussein was. Of course, I'm not a defender, don't know Saddam Hussein, but when it comes to people in government, I don't know. I don't really think that he's probably more evil than a lot of them. A lot of them just have a veneer of a facade of legitimacy. People like Barack Obama, David Cameron, George Bush, Dick Cheney, Paul Wolfowitz, all the neocons. I mean, I could go through the list of people that pretend to be offended. Oh, it's so horrendous. We can't stand for this evil in the world. And we, of course, are the right people to rid the world of evil because we are so illuminated. Anyway, so yeah, I was watching this film. Robert Barshoni put this out here, and it was all over the place. And it's one of those government. This is how you kill people with biological weapons type videos. A U.S. government informational film from the 1950s, and it's so cheesy, but at the same time, it has that 1950s, kind of narration, those fake voices. So it's very upbeat in its tempo and its cadence. And, I mean, you'd think they're talking about, some kind of new product from Whammo, but they're talking about killing people with biological weapons, and, how wonderful that could be. Anyway, it came from the 50s. It was made for the armed forces. It was just declassified. It provides instructions on how the U.S. could carry out offensive terrorism using biological and chemical agents, which the U.S. then did in numerous major cases. There's plenty of those, including on its own population, soldiers for terror, genocidal, and experimental purposes, as well as other reasons covered by the film. It goes into all of the wonderful reasons that you could use this to terrorize and to maim and mutate your enemy. The film says the U.S. offensive, not defensive, although the whole idea of having defensive chemical weapons that's just crazy. Okay, you want a desperate government that is in the last throes of maintaining control over its population and its enemies to have some kind of defensive chemical agent weapon? Sounds like a horrible idea. Sounds like, they might use that when they're desperate. It's a weapon of desperation. And to have that, to go after other countries for chemical weapons, to not only, land-base them and invade them for them once the U.S. created, manufactured, and sold those weapons. I mean, literally the proliferation of chemical weapons is one of the mainstays of the U.S. government's forward thinking, forward progress in places like the Middle East. It's a doctrine. But anyway, the U.S.'s offensive plan for the chemical warfare biological program was designed to, quote, reduce the enemy's production of food, of course, starve them, incapacitate the enemy's armed forces, and that portion of his human population that directly supports them, the farmers, all those people out there that are just doing their day-to-day jobs, trying to support the evil empire and pay their taxes and their tidings to the king. Thus, during World War II, for example, these rules would allow for bio/chemical weapons to be used against much of the population of the U.S. since it was largely working to support the troops in a war effort. So this is the justification of killing innocent humans because they are supporting the government, the war effort. So that was pretty much most people in this country during World War II. So if you look at it from maybe the German perspective, well, there you go. All right, quick break. Lots more coming your way. We're only halfway through the show. You can be part of it. It's Blacklisted Radio. And welcome back. It's Blacklisted Radio. Sunday night edition. It's the 18th day of October 2015. I'm your host, Doug Owen, and we are rolling into the second half of the show. If you'd like to be part of the discussion, the conversation, you can steer it at 1-800-313-9443. By the way, you can text me 512-222-3067. You can also leave us voicemails that we can play on air. And with that said, let's go to the phone lines and talk with Lee in California. Lee, welcome to Blacklisted Radio.
Doug, on the show earlier tonight, you were talking about hegemony, which means control. I
Yes.
thought I would tell you is the word is pronounced hegemony, just so you don't sound like an idiot, you know. But I have a
Hegemony.
joke that
There you go.
like
Good for you, man.
hegemony, yeah.
Russ, how are you doing tonight?
I have a joke for you, Doug, that your audience might
Russ,
get a
I
kick
thank
out
you for the call. I appreciate it. You call me each and every week. I feel like you're one of my biggest fanboys, and you know you're always out there with new names and new locations. So Lee in California today, somewhere else tomorrow. Appreciate your jokes. You can use the chat room at blacklistedradio.com to, enlighten and to entertain all of the people there. Let's go to Jane in Baltimore. Welcome, Jane.
Hey, Doug, your pick on these stories, but I consider them important. Since you brought up the use of biochemical warfare, that they're sort of doing a hangout on it. I call that apocalyptic in the literal meaning of apocalypse, which means the unveiling, right? Apocalypse from the Greek goddess Calypso.
Right.
And I think they reveal this in a way to desensitize people. I want to relate that directly to a YouTube video that's come out in the last few days and is circulating widely, about 10 or 15 minutes of a phone call to NASA where a NASA official, a scientist who names himself, confirms NASA's use of chemtrails for research, confirms the chemicals used and the reasons. In other words, he does a complete hangout on chemtrails very casually, very directly. And this YouTube video is now making the rounds. I immediately sent a copy of it to a couple former employees of NASA who I happen to know, and they said, "Oh yeah, this is legit." The guy names himself. I don't have it handy, but Russell's. The name of the scientist. So in other words,
what was the reasoning? I mean, what is the justification?
Well, they're not afraid. My reasoning,
his. Why does he think
they're using it for studying weather patterns, wind patterns, They lay down substances, barium, aluminum, in order to track weather. Basically, the same thing that Dame Whittington and Stevens and in other words, the same thing that the Geoengineering Watch people say. Basically, they're using initially. NASA is using it to track weather patterns, but the thing is, there's other spraying going on that has organic nanoparticles in it and stuff like that. But they're not going to do a hangout on that until they absolutely have to. But the point I'm getting at here is this is they're now, what's the significance of this? They're not afraid to mainstream a narrative of deliberate chemtrail spraying, and I've also seen this as the proposed solution to global warming or global climate change.
Sure. More
and more. So they're going to mainstream that. Now, the other two things that I thought were important, since you were talking about gun control, the first is that right here in Maryland, within the last few days, a federal judge has ruled that AR-15s don't fall within the meaning of a legitimate weapon of self-defense under the Second Amendment, effectively declaring AR-15s to be not covered by the Second Amendment here in Maryland. A lot of the comments out there, on media and the Facebook are saying that this is going to be overthrown pretty quick, but I really don't know. I'm just saying I happen to know a number of people who immediately went out and bought AR-15s. I think right after Sandy Hook, I know a bunch of people that went out and bought them.
Oh yeah, every one of those incidences just creates a windfall of cash for the gun companies.
Right, exactly. That's the short term. The long term. Well, who knows what the long term objective is? The other thing is, I don't watch these presidential debates anymore because they're so damn boring. Unless it's maybe to watch Trump, but they're so damn boring. In a Democratic debate, I rely on people like you. I rely on sources like you to explain do the filthy work of watching this stuff and then reporting back to me on it. The Democratic debate had one, and this is one where I had to go back and look this up and find it. Apparently, one of the participants is James Webb, who is a senator from Virginia, and has a pretty impressive resume. I mean, he's a former Marine. I think he was a deputy secretary of Defense in the Reagan administration, or has been in the he'd been at the Navy, high-ranking official in the Pentagon for the Navy, something like that. James Webb, a decorated combat veteran of the Vietnam War. I don't know if you saw this, but he made a spirited defense of the Second Amendment based on the argument that, hey, we're not like you elitists up here on this rostrum. We can't all afford to live in gated communities or have armies of armed bodyguards to protect us. That's what the Second Amendment is for us to protect ourselves, our families, our businesses, our communities. Did you see this at all? Did you catch any of this?
Oh yeah, I feel obligated to watch these things. Better than actually watching the debate was actually watching SNL last night with the skit, the parody on on Jim Webb and
they went after him on it or what?
Oh yeah, well not on that. They go after him because he said that he gets an A rating from the NRA, so they went after him on that, and he was played by Alec Baldwin. And one other note that they go after him for his, he said that equal rights and some of the legislation led to is anti-white, and right. so he basically said pass. He wouldn't answer the question. It was pretty funny because it did make Hillary look like the psychopath that she is, and Bernie Sanders. I got to go back and watch
that section. I didn't see that part of it. I went out there and I looked at the clip of him. I guess he was blindsided by Anderson Cooper on the gun issue or something, but I hadn't seen. I'm going to go back and look at that. But I'm glad you alerted me to that. I don't.
They made Bernie Sanders sound extra Jewy. They made him sound very Jewish.
God.
Aha! Yeah, and very cheap.
I wonder if they digitally enhanced his nose in real time for the image too.
I don't know. Yeah.
Anyway, hey, it's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it. You're doing it for us. What can I say?
Well, I appreciate that, Jane, and I appreciate the phone call. Great points, and yeah, I think it's
good to be reporting. And as always, I love Blacklisted News. You guys, you're on top of stuff, and
Yeah. Well, we try to be.
So have a good one.
You as well. Thanks, Jane.
Have a good one.
Yeah, Jane always brings up relevant points, and yeah, it's pretty mainstream, I guess, that the government is using a variety of chemicals and for a variety of reasons are spraying things into the sky. I mean, my wife and I, we get into it. She's like, yep, look at it. They're chemtrailing. And I always try to tone her down a little bit because she's all in. I mean, she is, she thinks every contrail is a chemtrail. But, I mean, there's nothing that secretive about weather modification, at least the cloud seeding operations have gone back, especially in the Midwest, all the way to the 1950s. It's always funny because I talk about these things with my father, and he's like, "Oh yeah, they've been doing that forever, spraying stuff in the air." Sure. And when you look at the the jet stream and how that could be used to distribute chemical weapons, biological agents, I mean it's something that NASA wants to know a lot more about. So it doesn't surprise me in the least that they are using barium, using aluminum and other pretty noxious chemicals to test these weather patterns. The barium is also used in with the topographical the X-class radar systems. So one of the problems is, why are they spraying? That's so hard to determine because there's just not that much discussion of it. I mean, you're not going to turn on the Weather Channel and hear them say, well, the reason that we have more rain today is because those farmers have been cloud seeding. It just doesn't enter into the equation. So most people are oblivious. And, one of the problems is that, you find a lot of people that are, how would I phrase it, over-alarmist. They believe that they know exactly what the government's doing, and it's part of a eugenics campaign, and that blah 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 blah. And so, rather than talking about all of the reasons that, yeah, the government is spraying all sorts of nasty chemicals, pesticides, who knows, on you. It becomes more about, the Illuminati and not that those things aren't relevant, but, there's a lot of conflation of these different, topics. So people, kind of jump off board. I mean, I had a friend of mine who he was going to some of the early Tea Party, prior to Tea Party, but back when it was a Ron Paul revolution in 2007, going to some of those meetings. And he said, I was all for in the Fed. I was all for, sound money. But once the, people that were talking about how they're using these smart meters to control my mind, people started, talking, I immediately bailed out of there. And it's not that they're, they don't have relevant points or they're, legitimate concerns. It's just that, people take it to that next level. So rather than having a discussion that seems like it's based in some kind of reality, they're the same people that believe that the CIA breaks into their house and rearranges their clothes type people. So you get a lot of people that come to the table for a lot of crazy reasons. So anyway, not crazy reasons, but different concerns. So you find them. One of which, a major concern to me, we'll talk about Pinochet in the final segment here, is that Google, the NSA, and the Department of Homeland Security are in the works to create a global DNA database. Now, when you look at the really creepy, really scary, declassified versions of some of the science they're using to manipulate and to create gene-specific or biologically specific bioweapons, even race-specific bioweapons, you start looking at, to develop those type of systems that the government, in so many different declassified documents has looked at, or at least people in government have talked about creating gene-specific bioweapons. One of the things that you would need to accomplish that is to have DNA of your enemies and the people that you would want to target and those that you would not. When it comes to DNA and the government creating banks and national databases, I find it to be very scary. Anyway, according to The Verge, Ancestry.com is seeking permission from the FDA to create a national database. Ancestry.com claims they'll use your DNA to assess your family's disease risk. Sounds nice, unless they use that information and sell it to insurance companies. You can see where that goes. Anyway, would it shock you to know, this is from Mass PI, or Mass Private Eye, rather, would it shock you to know that Google, the NSA, and the Department of Homeland Security are using front companies to create a global database? Now, a lot of you out there, maybe even Russ, would say, that sounds wacky. That sounds crazy. Anyway, Art Kaplan, a bioethicist at New York University, warns, quote, a lot of people want to get into the genomics risk assessment game. It's highly lucrative. I don't think they're giving customers straight information about their ancestry, and I'm worried when I hear them saying, oh, well, now we're in the health business. Yeah, and that's where it starts going downhill. Anyway, Ancestry.com recently purchased Sorensen Molecular Geology Foundation. The Sorensen's database has more than 100,000 DNA samples and documented multi-generational family histories from quote-unquote volunteers in more than 100 countries around the world. So, of course, Ancestry.com is sharing your information. Now, they say that they're not specifically sharing your information. They're not giving your home locale, your address, your age, in some cases, or they're just giving non-personal identified pieces of information, or without personal identifiers, I guess is what they call it. Basically saying, well, you have people in this demographic or that demographic, and here's a bunch of people that are 65, white, from the Midwest, so that they, they can kind of assess people in different regions, different age groups, blah, blah, blah. Well, anyway, one of the things most people that sign up and pay $100 to to 23andMe, to Ancestry.com, or one of these other gene sequencing companies, is that they will take your DNA and give it to the police. There's a new report out that Ancestry.com is giving police your DNA, even without a warrant in some cases. Big piece on the New Orleans Advocate about this, making a film about this. A filmmaker who was actually cleared because of his DNA that they got from Ancestry.com. So it sounds like a heartwarming piece about how, his DNA saved him from going to jail and helped them identify the correct culprit in this murder case. But believe you me, it could be the exact opposite. You were misidentified, you were miscategorized, and you were given a guilty verdict because of faulty DNA collection. I mean, it hasn't even been, 6 months now. The FBI crime lab had to eradicate thousands of convictions based on DNA evidence because of bad samples, and the practices that they used were not clean or ethical. I don't remember all of the details, but it's got to be a pretty big deal when the FBI decides to overturn, over 1,000 convictions. I mean, it has to be not just a slight oversight. I mean, it has to be like, a huge issue of cross-contamination, and that's what happened. Anyway, it's not going to be too long. There's another article from The Guardian that points out that it's only a few years away where police will be equipped with portable palm-sized DNA scanners that can read your DNA within 48 hours. Now, 48 hours is a long time. Can't just pull you over on the side of the road, grab your DNA, and wait there and find out who you are. But that is coming in the very near future. So, I mean, this kind of lays out where we see a future where we have almost no privacy, and people that want to find, solutions to, health issues that may arise in the future, or ones that they currently have. They're going to companies like Gene Tech and others like the research fellow for the Department of Homeland Security, Gene Tech rather. They're going to 23andMe. There's also Calico Labs. There's a lot of these groups that are popping up. 23andMe is a Google startup, and of course, Google would have no problem sharing your DNA with the NSA or the Department of Homeland Security. Tim Sullivan, Ancestry.com CEO, actually bragged about how they want to share their data with the government. I mean, Google. Quote, "We have been looking at and frankly responding to inquiries from a number of parties about ways that we can collaborate to take the data we've aggregated historically and that we're starting to aggregate now and get some real scale. We have a lot of business relationships with Google, but nothing else that I can speak to," Sullivan said. So, I mean, it's not just about selling you a service. That's one of the things that's so disingenuous about this. You think Ancestry.com takes your $100 to provide you a service, but they're taking your data, part of the big data complex, and selling you to these companies, selling you to the government. Twitter has what they call the fire hose. It's where every tweet that goes out there, if you pay enough money, you can get the fire hose too, goes right to the Department of Homeland Security for them to aggregate all of this information. Now, I've that's a lot of mindless crap and a lot of pictures of people's food, and with me, it'd probably be hundreds of pictures of hand premium cigars that I smoke. For the people that follow me on Facebook, it's got to be fun for you all, because that's what you get. That's what I put out on social media and news articles that disturb me, things that we talk about. But other than that, pretty boring Facebook life. And most people, sorry, no matter how exciting your life may be, would probably be considered boring to me. So when I think about mass data and how much information the government is scooping up out there, you have to think that 95% of it has to be almost virtually useless. Anyway, unless you're the right person that they would like to target, unless you're that person that the U.S. government has it in for. And, well, I don't know. I don't know if I'm on that list. And, well, you don't know either, because these companies could secretly give your information to the government, and then they could just put a FBI gag order on you so you couldn't tell other people about it. So, but I saw this report, and, I've been a big advocate of not giving your information, your DNA, to the government on almost any level. I mean, privacy is paramount, not because I'm paranoid that the government's going to get me or create a weapon to kill people like me, although they might, although they absolutely might. They were trying to do that going on, 60 plus years ago. How far have they gotten now? That would be a better question. And why would they abandon that? Do you think the government has become moral all of a sudden? Do you think that people have turned that cheek and they are different? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. The aforementioned articles kind of highlight that tonight here on the show. So think about it. The FBI just lost over, 1 million fingerprints from people that had applied for government jobs and part of their FBI huge database of fingerprints. And when you hear about, oh, well, we need fingerprint scanners on your iPhone, that's going to make it safer. Yeah, if not everybody on the internet had your fingerprint, because, time and time again, the government has been unable or unwilling or unwanting, in some cases, to protect privacy. And so, yeah, you can have a 20-point reference for your fingerprint, but if that information is readily available to whoever, I mean, not just hackers, not just the Russians or the Chinese, which I like to scare you with, but people that, in government that would be selling that information. I mean, you see how Ancestry.com is trying to recommodify the cash cow. How many different ways can we make money from this information? Yeah, it used to be about just charging you $100, but that only goes so far. And you only get so many people that want to be DNA sequenced for $100, and that cash runs out. It's about finding new ways to really sell out your customers. So I thought that was a pretty interesting story. Let's see, got about a minute or two here before we go to the break. Actually, we might be in the break. It's 9:55. I don't know. Maybe we swept that last break. Anyway, yeah. So Pinochet regime tied to Nazi medics enclave. Thought this was a huge story. Oh, okay, we did skip. All right, I'm not crazy. I saw this story, and it is a huge revelation by Yahoo News. Big report that is going to get almost no coverage, no traction whatsoever, so we'll talk about it. U.S.-backed Pinochet dictatorship had high-level ties to child-torturing ex-Nazis fortified cult. Can't make up the headline. It's so, there. There's a headline for you. Yet the terms come from Yahoo News report, which seems to be fairly well buried, as it only has one comment added. And crucially, the report makes no mention whatsoever of the U.S. support that brought Pinochet into power and kept him propped up for almost 2 decades. We could talk about his atrocities. Anyway, the close relationship between the U.S. and Pinochet, which goes unmentioned in Yahoo's coverage, is so well known that even the CIA-edited Wikipedia provides an adequate summary with a separate section on the 1973 coup, which brought Pinochet to power. It's titled U.S. Involvement. Goes on. Of course, the U.S. didn't like the leftist Allende movement in Chile, and on 9/11, 1973, they played a huge, crucial role in overthrowing Allende. Bet on the evil guy. Not a big surprise there. So, anyway, we found out just recently there was a colony that consisted of 32,000 acres and was home to 300 refugees from Nazi Germany and their descendants. Basically, they had this fortified sub-state-like entity It was ran as a cult with, of course, the ex-Nazi Paul Schaefer, who had this Chilean outpost called Colonio Dignidad. It was where they sadistically and brutally tortured sexually children and others. This is where all sorts of human experimentation went on. I mean, it is a huge treasure trove of evil that Yahoo uncovered, and there is literally no attention being paid to this whatsoever. So when you talk about you hear these rumors about the escape of Hitler to South America. Well, it doesn't seem that far-fetched when you read this. You can find the leaked report at blacklistednews.com. It's definitely worth the read, and that's our week. Thank you so much for being part of the show. I do appreciate all of you that support it. You can go to blacklistedradio.com to do that, and I'll be back next week for another live edition of Blacklisted News Radio. Until then, take care.